Which of the following is least likely a misleading practice that led to the development of the global investment performance standards? So least likely, meaning two of these are misleading practices and one is not. We've got A, survivorship bias. This was a misleading practice, and essentially what would happen is a fund manager could launch 5 different funds. 1 or 2 of them might crush it and do really, really well, and then they kill off the other 3, and then they show the really good performance of the 1 or 2 good, well-performing funds, making it look like they have some superior fund managers, when in reality they just threw a bunch of darts at the board and a couple of them stuck. B, representative accounts. This was also one of the misleading practices, so we can rule that out. And essentially what would happen is you might have a bunch of accounts as a part of one mandate, and the accounts are relatively similar since they're part of the same mandate, but 1 or 2 of them did a lot better. And so you show the performance of those a couple accounts that did a lot better. And this is obviously misleading because it's not necessarily indicative of the performance of all the accounts in the mandate. And then C, ensuring consistent data. We can go with this as our answer because having consistent data is not a misleading practice. That would be a good practice. Answer C. According to the CFA Institute Standards of Professional Conduct concerning disclosure of conflicts, potential conflict situations that could prohibit a member or candidate from fulfilling their duties to the employer should most appropriately be dealt with by A, documenting the conflict. I would say that's not a bad option, but I'm guessing we'll have a better answer than this. B, reporting the conflict to the employer. That definitely sounds like a better option than A. If there's going to be a conflict of interest with the employer, they should know about it. And C, disassociating from the situation. I would say B is still the better answer. We don't necessarily need to disassociate from the situation. It's better to report that to the employer and be on the same page, ensure whether or not they think you can or cannot continue doing that. And if they think you can't, then you can dissociate, but I think the next best step would be reporting it. Answer B. Tom Phillips, CFA, is an investment manager at VGF Investments. Previously, he worked at RTF Asset Managers, where he brought some of RTF's biggest current clients. Since joining VGF, Tom has been contacting RTF Asset Managers clients from a contact list he had saved while still working at RTF. That's not going to be allowed. While he's still working at his prior employer, he needs to be still loyal to them. And so saving this contact list to then later reach out to them is going to be a violation. Some of whom are clients that Tom has brought to RTF. That does not matter. Under the CFA Code and Standards, Tom's actions most likely do not violate. We have indicated that there is a violation, so we can rule that out. And we have violated, and then we have do not violate. So just on that merits, we can go with answer B. Let's read the rest of this answer just to be safe. Violated CFA Code and Standards by using his former employer's material to contact the prospective clients. That's correct. And the reason is, even though he brought these clients on, unless he had some specific arrangement with the firm bringing on these clients and these contacts, that is property of the firm while he's employed there. And so essentially he's stealing property of this firm and then bringing that to his new firm. Answer B. Mosaic Theory is defined as an analyst combining information that is non-material, non-public, and material public. B. Non-material, public, and material non-public. Or C. Material, non-public, and non-material public. So we've got a mishmash of answers here. So we can never use material non-public information. That's not going to be allowed, so we can rule out B right off the bat. So then between A and C here, for C we have material non-public and non-material public. Again, this is using material non-public information, and so we would likely rule out for that reason. And then non-material public, you wouldn't really be using that information in your analysis, or it wouldn't be as helpful because it's public. So that's going to leave us with A. So essentially we have non-material, non-public information. We can use that information in tandem with material public information to essentially put together a theory and combining these two things. And so we're allowed to use non-material non-public, and we're allowed to use material public since it is public information. Answer A. To assure fair dealing, members and candidates should most likely issue an investment recommendation. A, to all its clients first, then within the firm. B, simultaneously within the firm and to all its clients. Or C, simultaneously to suitable clients and within the firm. So for fair dealing, we shouldn't just release to suitable clients. We would want to release to all clients. That's going to lead this to be a better answer. And then between A and B, there's not really a requirement to send this to clients first, then within the firm. So I think best practice would just be simultaneously within the firm and to all clients. That's going to be our best answer. Answer B. Laura Elliott is a broker at Housegate, a broker-dealer firm. She undertakes trades on behalf of clients with a high net worth. She discovers that one of her clients has engaged in portfolio funds embezzlement, which classifies as an illegal activity under domestic trading regulations. To comply with the CFA Institute Standards of Professional Conduct, Elliott's preliminary course of action would most appropriately be to A, request for a different assignment. This does not take care of the issue of their client breaking the law or participating in this illegal activity. So this is not going to be the next best thing to do. B, report the violation to her supervisor. That sounds like a good next step in escalating this up. And C, report the violation to regulatory authorities. This might be eventually what happens. However, we're going to say as the next course of action, the best thing to do is going to be B, reporting to her supervisor, and then eventually this could get escalated up to regulatory authorities. Answer B, conduct that constitutes a violation of the CFA Institute Standards of Professional Conduct concerning conduct as members and candidates in the CFA program most likely includes A, cheating on an MBA exam. We can rule this out. While this is unethical, the CFA program and standards don't extend to MBA exams, and so we can rule out A. B, soliciting employer clients before departing. So this would be a violation likely, but not under this standard related to members and candidates in the CFA program. This is going to be related to loyalty to your employer. And then answer C, not following security measures implemented for the CFA exam. That'll be our answer, since this is going to fall more specifically under this standard relating to members and candidates in the program. Answer C. Jason Gilbert, CFA, is an exam grader for the CFA program. He also works as an independent research analyst. When asked about his experience as a grader and the CFA program's scope in the financial market, Gilbert makes the following comments. Comment 1. Although results for the CFA exam are yet to be released, pass rates will be the lowest across all levels. That sounds like it could be a violation and information that he's not supposed to share since this hasn't been released yet. And then comment 2, the CFA program equips candidates to be qualified enough to deal with a broad range of real-life topics, including but not limited to financial analysis, portfolio management, quantitative techniques, and corporate finance. That sounds like a good comment. It's not giving any specific information about the exam, just giving his opinion on the program overall. Which comment most likely represents a violation of the CFA Institute Standards of Professional Conduct? Is it comment 1 only, comment 2 only, or both? And based on what we've said before, we'll go with comment 1 only because we're giving specific information about the exam that has not yet been released. Answer A. To ensure compliance with the standard, members must understand each client's unique needs. Investment professionals should seek to communicate recommendations to all clients who have indicated an interest and those for whom the securities fit. The standard does not prohibit a firm from offering various service levels. This passage from the CFA Code and Standards most likely relates to which of the following? Is it A, Standard 3C, Suitability, B, Standard 4C, Responsibility of Supervisors, or Standard 5A, Diligence and Reasonable Basis? So for responsibility of supervisors, this is almost exclusively relating to client interaction, not a supervisor's role with people that they delegate work to or people that work under them. So we can rule that out right off the bat. And diligence and reasonable basis is going to be related more to investment analysis. So we can rule that out. This is going to fall under suitability, and the keywords here are for whom the securities fit. So what securities are these, is suitable for which clients, and understanding each client's unique needs. So what is suitable for that client given this understanding. Whereas diligence and reasonable basis is not going to be as focused on the client, it's going to be more focused on the specific investments. Answer A. Nelson Wan, CFA, is a tax advisor at a financial services firm. His recent article on effectively implementing tax minimization strategies for client portfolios with high tax brackets has increased his popularity in the industry. Wan is offered an opportunity to deliver a lecture on tax minimization strategies to employees of an investment management firm in New Zealand. The firm offers to pay for his travel expenses and hotel accommodation. Wan accepts the offer, informs his employer, and travels to New Zealand with his fully paid trip. After the lecture, the senior investment manager invites Wan to a golf game at an exclusive club. He accepts the offer and informs his supervisor of the invitation upon his return. According to the Standards of Practice Handbook, Wan is most likely in violation. He should have paid for the New Zealand trip out of pocket. This is not going to be a violation here, and mainly because this isn't necessarily a conflict of interest. I don't think it says where they're from, but if he's a US-based advisor, let's say, and he's going to New Zealand to do this, they're just bringing the strategy to New Zealand employees in a New Zealand firm. They're probably not competitive, and so him accepting compensation to do this is not in competition with his firm. So I wouldn't say it's creating any independence and objectivity issues or conflicts of interest there. B, in violation, he did not seek written permission prior to accepting the golf game offer. I think you could make the case for this. However, it seems like this came up after the fact. It was not something planned ahead of time, so it might have been tough to inform his employer ahead of time. Let's see what answer C is. In compliance, details of the golf game were not available to him before departing for New Zealand. I would say that I would lean towards C as being the better answer. And it's a golf game at an exclusive club. However, this probably isn't a type of gift that would lead to poor independence and objectivity. And again, like we said in A, this is more so an independent opportunity for him, not necessarily related to his job or in conflict with his employer. And so for that reason, I would lean towards this not being a violation. Answer C.